So what you see here is a new trend in publishing, of coming up with a list of objects that you can use to describe a period of time. This is probably the one I saw with the most objects, 1,000 objects describing the history of the world. I've seen them with 20 objects describing World War II, 50 objects describing the Civil War, 25 objects describing the 1960s. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests, I want to take this list and do a couple different things with it today and not make it more personal for me. We often talk about what books we would take to a desert island, or what are our favorite books. And today I want to give you a list of 5.5 books that have influenced me or have had meaning to me. Again, these may not be the books I would take to a desert island. I would probably look for something much thicker. But at different points in my life, these books have had meaning for me. The first book was when I was in high school, took a class in novels. And this is The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. The premise of the book is in the early 1700s, a bridge collapses in Peru and 5 people perish in that collapse. A priest witnesses the fall and asks one question and can't get it out of his mind until he starts working on it. Why at this time? Why these 5 died at this time? And the book is his research and recapping as to what happened. An understated book, much to think about. And for me it was different because at that point I was into James Michener, if you remember him, the inch-thick novel, Centennial, Hawaii, The Source. And so this taught me that you can do other things in fiction than recap history. And I have multiple copies of this book at my house, and I've reread it a couple different times. The next book I read first time in college, and I've been into science fiction a lot, but this changed my view of what science fiction could be. A Canticle for Leibniz by Walter Miller. 3 different stories set in 3 different times after a nuclear war. One a few years after the war, the second stage about where our Middle Ages would have been, and the third at a time more advanced than we have. Technology has gone much farther than that. And looking at how society recovered, at that point the Catholic Church had been deemed to capture as much of the technology, as much of the history as they could after the nuclear war and moving forward. So again, growing up in the late 70s, it was Star Wars or Star Trek, Jedi or Klingons. And this book taught me that you can do more with science fiction. You don't need to have ships exploding or other events like that. It taught me that it could be an idea for thought and an idea to think about. Again, it left me with a lot to think about, especially as it wrapped up. So the next 2 books are where the half come in the title, because these are somewhat textbooks. Oh, Pascal. I thought I was really dating myself. It's good to know someone recognizes Oh, Pascal in the room. So Pascal is the structured programming language. It's the first language I learned when I started at IBM, because all I'd had in college was Fortran. And for me, this was an important book because I saw data structures in there I'd never seen before, and more than I'd ever seen in my undergrad work. And by the end of the book, when we were talking about pointers and linked lists, and there was an example problem from the back, and I was able to finally get it to work out, and for me it was reassuring that I could make it at IBM. And I actually have a printout somewhere of that program. The second textbook is Computer Architecture, Quantitative Approach, which I took at my master's degree from the University of Minnesota. And I have good memories of this because I had a really good professor teaching that class. And it's interesting that my youngest son, Matt, got his bachelor's at the University of Minnesota, and they used a revised edition of this textbook in his class 20 years later, so it obviously has become a standard. Now, the reason I call these 1.5 books is that for me, I don't go cover to cover in textbooks. Maybe other people do, but I don't go cover to cover, so really I can't claim 2 books here, but maybe a book and a half I got through when reading these to get through my classes and to get through my work. So not a shout out to the TV series called 2.5 Men, but I thought it was kind of close. This book is helped me as I started becoming more serious about Christianity. It was in our church library at that time. It's called The Kingdom of God by John Bright. He's looking at the idea of what themes you could take from the Old Testament through it and into the New Testament. And his idea in this book is that you could trace the idea of what the kingdom of God looks like. A well-written book from the 1950s. Ideas are still appropriate today. Tracing through ideas about God, about how it's revealed in the Bible. And in full disclosure, I did not steal this book from our church library. I did buy this from a librist, so this is my personal copy. And the last book is a history book. I've been interested in the Civil War for a long time, and I thought about bringing Shelby Foote's Civil War trilogy. Again, that's a doorstop there, which is what was based on the Ken Burns Civil War series. This is a history of the 1st Minnesota Regiment, starting from recruitment, a lot in this area of Minnesota, recruitment to Fort Snelling for training, and then following the 1st Minnesota through their battles, ending at Gettysburg. And even though we have a small number of regiments that fought in the Civil War, Minnesota, this regiment played a key role during Day 2 of Gettysburg. And I learned that when we traveled to Gettysburg, and that the first monument on the battlefield is from the state of Minnesota. The battlefield is covered with monuments. We have the first one from the state of Minnesota. As he recounts the soldiers' experiences from their letters, it struck me that they were brave, courageous, and eloquent. And I find that that's a challenge to me to try to be maybe not as eloquent as they are, but they were in some ways remarkable people. The 2nd Minnesota is also a great story, and I think there's a book out there about that. So again, this is not a best of list, a list I would take to a desert island. It's a list that has had impact and influence on me. Today I've been reading more books about Israel since I was on the trip to Israel earlier this year, and I find I've had more interest in the Middle East, and I've been starting to read a little more about the civil rights movement. But I encourage all of you today to come up with a list of your own, of books, of movies, of songs, of essays, of albums that have, maybe even TV shows that have influenced you. Not necessarily best of, or it could be a list that you would, when Netflix used to send DVDs, you could have a list of what you wanted to watch. But I encourage you to come up with that list of what's influenced you and see maybe can you trace anything through your life that maybe it might help give some insight to you. It's helped me preparing for this speech, and I hope it's given you some ideas of maybe new books to read while you're with your gourd. It's fun. Mr. Toastmaster.